Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson, and we are moving on to week 4. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the people.
Hello, I'm Carson, and as we always talk about at the beginning of this videos, I've taken a bigger lead on the matchup predictions the past 3 weeks. I am currently 28 out of 48, I guess.
28 and 20.
28 and 20, and then Blake is an even 50%.
Rocking at 500. Yep.
So I have a 4-game lead, and this is just a fun side thing that we're doing along with the season. But yeah, it is it's interesting, and that's all I got.
Well, I think what it really speaks to is the parity in the league right now, because a lot of the times, very infrequently are we picking the underdog, but it does show that even when you pick the favorites, most of the time, like in my case, it's a 50-50 shot of whether you'll be right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. The league is exciting as ever, although running backs have been horrible.
No kidding.
And we'll talk about that throughout the show, but try not to harp on it too much. I think that for a lot of the top-end players, guys you took in the first and second round at running back, they're going to figure things out as the season progresses. And just, be mindful. Don't panic too much. And let's go ahead and get into this with our Thursday night matchup, which of course is the Miami Dolphins playing the Cincinnati Bengals.
The undefeated Dolphins. Sorry, I just had to add that into the mix.
Wow, okay. Local Patriots fan here. We don't like that the Dolphins are undefeated, but I will say this. They look really good. And let's go ahead and talk about them. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is how lopsided this game was despite the final score. Miami ran 39 plays on offense compared to Buffalo's 90.
Jeez.
They had Buffalo outpossessed them 40 minutes to 19. So, 40 and some change, 19 and some change to get to 60. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was a very lopsided affair, and in spite of that, the Dolphins figured out a way to win. And I just want to say, in terms of real NFL takeaways, Miami looks, they're one of the 2 undefeated teams still remaining, but they look legit in a sense, especially on the offensive end. And Carson, what were your main takeaways?
Yeah, I feel like if I was to make a power ranking for every team, I would still have the Bills ahead of the Dolphins despite the result of that game. But they do look legit.
I wouldn't disagree with you there. Obviously, a poor performance on the offensive end of the field by the Bills in that game. With 90 offensive plays, you would expect them to score 90 points. So honestly, it's not it's not the expected outcome for the Bills, considering how much offense they had in that game. And of course, a missed field goal ultimately did decide the game, although not in the closing moments. Not to put too much blame on the kicker, of course. They could have scored a lot more touchdowns with how many plays they ran. But you hate to see that. So I was a little biased in this case. I was hoping the Bills would be undefeated when I went to go see them play the Chiefs in Week 6. But alas, both teams lost, as we'll get to later on. But let's go ahead and talk about some fantasy now that we're about 3 or 4 minutes into this. So my main fantasy takeaway from this game, because you can't read too much into the stats, only having 39 offensive plays. That being said, Chase Edmonds is a risky touchdown-dependent flex. Raheem Mostert is leading in snap percentage in back-to-back weeks. And I'm just concerned that, if Chase Edmonds doesn't get those 2 touchdowns on the ground, that people are going to be looking at him and being like, wow, this guy's barely getting used at all. What am I supposed to do with this guy? So obviously the touchdown saved you last week. Carson, you want to jump in there?
As someone, I have Edmonds and now have Mostert too. Edmonds would have had 3 points and change if it wasn't for the 2 touchdowns. He scored 15 total. So that's not super exciting. I think he had 6 touches, but again, this is kind of a weird offensive day for the team. But you don't like to see Mostert leading snap percentage back-to-back weeks. That's bad. And of course, whenever Mostert has this role that takes away value from another running back, it's the season where he's the most healthy. So that's great. But that's probably why he's staying healthy, because he's not actually looked at as the RB1 on the team, even if he's taking most of the snaps some weeks. But it's weird. You want Edmonds to get more receiving work to have a higher floor, but again, you can't really pull from this game, but that's not really what happened here.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it does show, at least on Sleeper, with the team depth chart feature, that Chase Edmonds is ahead of Raheem Mostert despite the snap percentage discrepancy. Let's talk briefly about Tua Tagovailoa. So his status on a short week obviously is questionable at the time of this recording. They're claiming it's an ankle and a back injury, but if you saw the clip that a lot of us have seen of Tua, or if you were watching that game live, you saw Tua just absolutely bash his head up against the turf, obviously still with the helmet on, of course, but that contact is, I mean, it just seems like it's the textbook definition of something that would cause a concussion. And he's stumbling on his way back to the huddle and looks shaken up, and all of this happens prior to halftime. They take him straight to the locker room. He is with the medical staff there, and to many people's surprise, he comes back out and finishes that game. So there is an NFLPA investigation underway on how the concussion protocol was administered in that game, and that's interesting. So there may be some disciplinary action taken against the Dolphins again this season, as there already was earlier. So that's something to monitor. But in terms of fantasy football, Tua's still, I mean, I like the matchup, honestly. I don't think the Bengals defense scares you. If Tua's good to go and not limited by his injuries or, what lingers as a potential concussion, then I'm still comfortable starting him this week. Carson, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, if you had him as your QB2 or picked him up off the waivers beginning of the season, you got to be pretty happy with that decision. Because he definitely wasn't drafted like a QB1.
No, not at all. Let's go ahead and switch to the other side of this game, which I was trying to get out there when we first started, but the Bengals, I hear, are going to be rocking the white helmets this game.
Yes, I actually did see a post about that. I think those are really cool. Maybe it can inspire them to get another win.
Yeah, so let's talk about Joe Mixon, which I started at the beginning of this talking about fantasy running backs underperforming. 6.8 fantasy points for Joe Mixon. He got 12 carries for 24 yards and had 7 targets, only caught 3 for 14 yards. Played 66% of the snaps. Now, this was a little bit due to an injury. He has a bit of an ankle issue going on. Head coach Zach Taylor says Mixon will be good to go for Thursday Night Football. Of course, this is getting uploaded on Thursday, so if something's changed, understand that this was recorded the day prior. But if something changes, Samaje Perine is performing well in Mixon's absence in this game. Had 9 carries for 47 yards. You like the efficiency there. And also 2 catches on 2 targets for 14 yards and a touchdown on only 34% of the snaps at the Jets. So, there's a bit of a caveat there. They were playing the Jets, but I expect also second-year running back Chris Evans to be kind of more involved in the pass-catching role if Mixon were to be inactive. So the other thing that I'd like to talk about is Tyler Boyd. And I'm going to direct this question at you, Carson. News or noise on a 20.5-point fantasy day?
Probably noise, because he does this every once in a while. I mean, you're rostering him because he has weeks like this, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of weeks where he falls behind.
You don't know when they're coming.
Yeah, where he falls behind Chase and Higgins, because that's what you expect. I don't know if this was a long touchdown from looking at these stats, but if it was, that's even more evidence for the fact that this was a little bit unsustainable for Tyler Boyd, because it's just a big touchdown play and a few catches. I mean, you're not getting super excited about a guy with 5 targets on a team that already has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So, yeah, probably noise, because this happens. If you're new to the situation, Boyd will go back to doing single digits for a few weeks and then do this again. So that's just kind of how it goes with him with his role in the team.
Yeah, for Boyd, the touchdown catch was a 56-yarder. So a big play kind of made his day there, as you were alluding to. But yeah, I think, probably he's mostly viewed as an insurance policy if if something happens to T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. But But yeah, I think don't make too much of a fuss over this game for Tyler Boyd. You ready to pick this game, Carson?
Yeah, I think I am. And the Bengals are the favorites, but because they are home, this is tough, especially if Tua's inactive and you're waiting for me.
I am because, well, I got to make up that difference. But I will say their backup's not the worst person in the world in terms of backup quarterbacks. It's Teddy Bridgewater.
Okay.
You're familiar with him, of course.
Yes.
As a former Broncos player, we'll call him.
Yeah.
And so if things don't work out, the talent in the receiving core is still going to be there. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is a game changer. And I see you're hovering over Miami right now.
I'm changing it.
Now switching back to the Bengals.
I'm going Bengals.
I'm giving a live commentary
I'm
here.
going Bengals.
You're picking the Bengals. I think I'm gonna stick with you. This is not the game that I think I'm gonna make my difference up here. I'm also going to take the Bengals at home. I think that those white helmets are going to be they're going to be an extra motivating factor. I think they look really cool, like you said, and
I mean they're going into this game.
They're
going into this game 1-2, whereas the Dolphins are 3-0, and they're home. I just feel like they're gonna have more of that heart for this one. And we can't forget what this team did last season. So it's not like they're pushed over, even if the Dolphins are in good form. So, but it could really go either way. This should be a good game.
Yeah, I'm hoping Joe Burrow keeps that momentum going from week 3 and takes it to the Dolphins. Yeah. All right, let's move on to the London game, 8:30 Central Time on Sunday morning. All right, I'll stop doing that. Let's do the whole segment.
Yeah.
But it's Vikings against the Saints. And first person I want to talk about, it's going to be a theme on this show this week, Dalvin Cook. A little bit of a bounce back game, considering what he's done for you lately, but it was 13.5 fantasy points. He's got that dislocated shoulder injury. He's considered day-to-day, and most reports are indicating he's going to wear a harness and play in this game. And, you know, we all know that Alexander Mattison is basically Dalvin Cook's clone when it comes to Cook missing time and Alexander Mattison getting the majority of the workload. So if Cook is ruled inactive, then obviously plug in Alexander Mattison. But, you know, we saw Dalvin Cook play with that harness, I think it was just last season, and performed really well. So he's used to doing this kind of thing. Obviously the matchup isn't fantastic. The Saints defense is pretty formidable. But, you know, if you have Dalvin Cook, you have to start him if he plays, and that's kind of just the takeaway there. Next, I want to talk about KJ Osborne. He got 18.3 fantasy points on 8 targets, had 5 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. And to me, this is similar to the Tyler Boyd situation. As of now, he's still the wide receiver 3 on the roster. You know, Adam Thielen's not looking the best so far, and obviously, you know, the elephant in the room for this roster is that Justin Jefferson's getting locked up in consecutive weeks. But the talent is definitely still there. I'm not panicking on Justin Jefferson, but I am saying that as of right now, KJ Osborne's still the number 3, and I'm not exactly rushing out to plug him into my lineups anytime soon. Anything down there?
No, I agree. I think the comparison to Tyler Boyd is very fair because he's behind Jefferson and Thielen. And, I mean, I know Irv Smith didn't do great this week, but he has in prior weeks with getting targets, so it's just another person to add into the mix. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. Well, talking about the Saints, Michael Thomas left this game at one point with a toe injury, and it's not considered serious. Still want to go ahead and monitor his status. He got you just under 10 fantasy points, 5 for 5 for 49 yards. And here's the thing with Michael Thomas. I think that he's probably still the most talented wide receiver on the team. So if he's healthy, obviously I'm playing him. But let's talk about somebody who might be challenging him for that role, and that's Chris Olave. 23.7 fantasy points. So it has to be mentioned that Jarvis Landry and Michael Thomas were both absent for portions of this game, and I think Chris Olave kind of, you know, took that slack and ran with it. So 13 targets, had 9 catches for 147 yards. He's had 13 targets in back-to-back weeks. And I'm going to ask you, is it time to sell high on Chris Olave, or is this a rookie breakout?
So I think what I'll say is that if you want to basically pawn him off for a running back as a sell high option, I think I would do that. But I think in terms of wide receivers, I think he's kind of legit. So if you're just trying to target a different wide receiver, I don't know if I would really do that. I'm not going to say he's doing this every week, but he's getting the targets. Michael Thomas is seeming like a sort of different player, different type of wide receiver archetype than he has before, and Olave is getting a lot of targets.
I think it comes... I was just going to say, I think that comes mostly from the quarterback play.
Yeah.
You know, Jameis Winston is a much different quarterback from Drew Brees.
Yeah.
And so, you know, from that perspective, I think Michael Thomas is kind of filling the role that this offense is built around. Chris Olave leads the league in air yards.
Wow. Which
is like how far, by like a large margin, like 100 plus yards. I think 160 or something. So Jameis is slinging that thing, and Chris Olave is the target on most of those balls, and that's valuable, obviously. That's big play upside. And so I agree with you in terms of you're probably not going to improve at wide receiver with Olave involved in the trade. But it is an interesting thought because in terms of picking up a running back, obviously none of them are really doing a lot right now, but in terms of, you know, maybe you buy low with a sell high candidate, you know, you combine those two factors and you can get a pretty good haul. So something to consider. I think, obviously, along your same thought process, it's probably not the norm that he's putting 20 plus up every week, but the workload's there. It's just something to consider. I thought it was interesting. And I see you've picked the Vikings for this one.
Yeah.
The Saints just don't look very good. No. And I know that Jameis Winston's dealing with an injury as well. So I'm going to go with you on this one as well. Picking the Vikings to win. They are the 2.5 point favorite. And let's go ahead and move on to the next game. So up next, we've got the Seattle Seahawks playing the Detroit Lions. And this is our... You know, just a season ago, this would have been a pretty, like, just dumpster fire of a game, I feel like. Yeah. But the Detroit Lions are looking pretty good, I gotta say. And I want to say that they kind of disappointed me a little bit last week because I think I picked them to win. And yeah, that's right. You picked the Vikings to beat them, and you got that point. But very much so. It was a 4-point game at the end. But let's go ahead and talk about the Seahawks here. I want to talk specifically about the running backs. Now, Rashad Penny got you 7.9 fantasy points. He had 14 carries for 66 yards, caught a ball for 3 yards. Just kind of meh, not really great. Played 69% of the snaps. He is still the lead back by all indications, but he is very much so touchdown dependent. We've talked about the pass catchers on this offense. I think you probably, based on what they can provide, you probably should be starting DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett every week. But in terms of these running backs, they're a flex for Penny, and then with Ken Walker, only 6.3 fantasy points. He only played 13% of the snaps. You got to keep holding him on the bench because, at some point Penny's going to break down. It's just part of his... Well, it really is. It's just part of his career path. He has injury history, and Ken Walker is talented. I mean, he averaged over 6 yards a carry on the 3 carries that he got. Small sample size, obviously, but I mean, he looks like one of the most talented running backs coming into this draft class, and I think if you continue to hold him on your bench, at some point he's going to have to pay off. But this offense is pretty desolate when it comes to running backs right now.
Yeah, I agree. I do not drop Ken Walker because of all the things you just said about Rashad Penny. I mean, if he had a full career Hall of Fame first ballot in my eyes, it's the running joke I have with him. And look, he was running efficiently, but he's not getting the volume to be a starter that you're super excited about. How about that? But then Ken Walker behind him because he does have injury problems in the past. So, yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Lions, who have the exact opposite problem as the Seahawks in terms of their running backs. They've got 2 running backs that are inside the top 7 in fantasy scoring through 3 weeks. And I want to check that because that's correct. Because Jamal Williams is just pulling out touchdowns out of his little rabbit hat. 2 touchdowns in 2 of the 3 games he's played so far this season. Here's the thing. If those touchdowns aren't there, people are talking a lot differently about Jamal Williams, but he keeps getting the goal line work, so it seems more likely than not that he's going to continue to get those touches, especially when you consider that DeAndre Swift, with a combination of a shoulder and an ankle injury, he could potentially miss multiple weeks. With a Week 6 bye, Dan Campbell has said that Swift could be rested through that Week 6 bye, returning in Week 7, and be in a position to be fully healthy after that stretch and take that role back in this offense. I mean, Jamal Williams is performing well. 20 carries for 87 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 catches for 20 yards. That was only on 45% of the snaps, mind you. I mean, it's just they have a pretty strong backfield on that team, and so there's a consideration that DeAndre Swift might be held out for a few games. Obviously, that hurts. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like you didn't feel like this last season, but I think Jamal Williams is now can be looked at as a premier handcuff because you got to remember what he did on the Packers behind Aaron Jones when he was given opportunity. So he is a valuable player to have.
Sometimes in front of Aaron Jones.
Yes.
I mean, let's be honest.
Exactly. There was a whole feed Aaron Jones thing because he kept on getting vultured, like Swift kind of is.
Right. Right.
So
yeah, Jamal Williams has a very colored history with being part of committees.
Yeah.
That's just the
reality. But I agree. I don't think you can start him if Swift is there because the touchdowns do change everything, and that's just not something I want to bank on with a starter. Right. But yeah, premier handcuff in my eyes now.
Yeah, and I also want to mention Craig Reynolds, who, just a few 2 years ago you didn't even know the guy's name. Yeah. But be aware that Detroit has deployed a committee approach whenever Swift has missed games in the past. Reynolds has limited usage in the pass game when he plays, but we've seen him kind of pop up and be involved in this backfield whenever Swift misses time. So I think just bear in mind that if you start Jamal Williams, that I believe he's number 46. Number 46 might be running the ball. Yeah, that's correct. And on any given play this game, just be aware of that. I don't recommend starting Craig Reynolds, obviously, but just be mindful that that's probably gonna take place here. You're picking the Lions here. I'm definitely not picking the Seahawks, so I'm gonna be with you on that one. No offense, Hawks Nation, but
in Detroit too.
We're going Lions on this one. Yeah, 4.5-point favorites at home. I think that's a pretty safe choice there.
Yep.
Let's talk now about the Jets and the Steelers. So, I say this with a heavy heart because it's been confirmed today that Zach Wilson's coming back to start for the Jets. I've got a bit of a, I don't know how to put it nicely, but I don't like the player. Not as a person, of course, but like
of course
as a talent on the field. I just think that he's no good, and no good for this team either. The best thing he does for them is he delivers high draft picks. So let me just say this. I'm talking about the running backs first. Michael Carter got 5.5 fantasy points. Nothing really special here. The thing to note is that it was the first game this season where he had fewer than 60% of the snaps. He finished with 49%, and you know what that means. The rookie Breece Hall played on 51% of the snaps. So there might be a changing of the guard here, as we say. Breece Hall had 15.2 fantasy points. Now, very efficient. 8 carries for 39 yards. But it got 11 targets in the passing game, caught 6 of them for 53. You love that number. I know you're salivating over there.
I think,
but
if I can jump in, I think what's important here is, him overtaking him in snap percentage, but also just the difference in targets that makes you feel better about Zach Wilson coming back because, little dump-offs to running backs, anyone can do that. So if Breece Hall is getting all of that work over Carter, I think that keeps Breece Hall's floor pretty high, and he's trending in the right direction as far as the snap count. So, Yeah, I'm not too worried. I know we'll talk about what Zach Wilson will do other players later on with the Jets, but I'm not too worried about Brees Hall with him personally.
No, I'm with you. I think, with double-digit scoring in 3 consecutive weeks, obviously my only reservation is that Zach Wilson's the quarterback now, but I feel fairly comfortable flexing Brees Hall, and I think I'm going to fade Michael Carter this week. It just the tides are shifting, and it seems like it's going to be Brees Hall's backfield. His job to lose. And I know that we're kind of, hyping up a 51-49 split, but it's really just that it's shifting from, a 60-40 and kind of trending in the opposite direction. So that's how I feel about that. And then on to the pass catchers. Tyler Conklin obviously filled in very well for me, replacing Dalton Schultz last week. Got 16.4 fantasy points. His targets through 3 weeks are 7, 9, and 8. So the workload, the target share is there. Obviously, I'm hoping that remains the case with Zach Wilson in at QB. But let's talk about the other pass catchers here. The wide receivers specifically. The rookie Garrett Wilson, 12 fantasy points. He had 10 targets this week, had 14 the week before, and 8 in week 1. Now, obviously, Joe Flacco's been throwing the ball about 100 times every game. So, that helps in terms of inflating everyone's target numbers. But Garrett Wilson, he's been performing well, especially these last 2 weeks where he really blew up. Elijah Moore, on the other hand, has been very disappointing. 8.9 fantasy points in this previous game. Single-digit fantasy scoring all 3 weeks. So I'll ask you, if you're starting any of these pass catchers, who is it this week?
Probably, that's tough. I don't really want to have to start either of them. I want to see what happens with Zach Wilson. But I would say for familiarity purposes, Elijah Moore. But although Elijah Moore's biggest games were without Zach Wilson, I'm just saying because they have chemistry from last season, so I would bank on him over the rookie. But Elijah Moore's best games weren't even with the rookie, or with Zach Wilson.
I'm really surprised by that. That's interesting. So for me, I'm thinking at where you drafted Garrett Wilson, he was probably like your 4th wide receiver, maybe your 3rd if you waited. So... Well, honestly, right?
Well, I feel like, if anything, maybe even the 5th.
Okay. So, and that's kind of what I was thinking. But, things have changed, obviously, in the first 3 weeks with your roster. Mm-hmm. You probably don't have exactly who you drafted. But my point being, he's been the guy that has been getting the looks and producing on the field. I'm really surprised that you're leaning towards Elijah Moore, who hasn't done anything.
I'm not leaning towards either of them, if I'm being honest. I'm looking at some stats real quick, and the fewest amount of times that Flacco has thrown the ball this season is 44, and Wilson never did that last season. Never eclipsed 44. His highest was 42. So, he completed 19 of those. Fun fact.
Hey, is that good?
No, it's not. He never had more than 23 completions. Oh God, I forget how bad this guy is.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was saying. Like, I don't want to be a dick about it, but okay. First of all, just remember, Patriots all the way. Jets stink. But no, let's just call it how it is. Zach Wilson is not the answer for this team at quarterback, and it's suffering. The skill position players on this team are suffering anytime he's on the field. I don't know why they feel so committed to him. I get it. He was the 2nd overall draft pick, but it's just like everyone seems to perform better when they get the opportunity. Remember Mike White?
Yep.
Remember Mike White coming in and making plays? Like that was a real thing that happened when Zach Wilson missed time last year. So I don't want to get too excited about all this, but I think, if anybody, probably the person that you feel safest starting would be Tyler Conklin. He seems to have the most likely chance of finding the end zone from Zach Wilson, I would say. Mm-hmm. But I'm with you on this. I'm leaning towards fading all of my pass catchers on this team that I may roster, just in favor of seeing what happens when Wilson actually hits the field. So let's go ahead and move on to the Steelers, the other side of this matchup. Obviously, they are the home team, favored by 3.5 points. And I'll just say this: it's really brief. You have to continue starting Najee Harris and Deontay Johnson. George Pickens had an awesome catch that just kind of took social media by storm. Yeah. And outside of those two players that I already mentioned, nobody seems to be reliable in this offense, because after that catch, he kind of just disappeared in that game. And it's like, wow, this guy's capable of making this kind of play, and you're not getting him more looks. Like, what is that about? So I think it kind of falls on Mitch Trubisky. I know Steelers fans are pounding the table for Kenny Pickett to start. I think Mike Tomlin's going to probably hold off on that as long as he can, because he's got a reputation on that team of, producing winning seasons. And I think in his mind, putting out a rookie QB is a little too risky to produce that kind of outcome. Mm-hmm. So, it'll happen at some point this year, but I don't know when, and nobody does at this point. So let's go ahead and pick this game. I think, based on our conversation, despite not having a lot of good things to say about the Steelers, we're picking them to win this game.
Yeah, honestly, I'm picking the Jets if Flacco was starting. I'm not even going to lie.
That's, you know what? I don't fault you for that.
Yeah.
I think you're not far off on there, honestly.
I just looked at Zach Wilson's stats again.
Right, yeah. If you need a refresher,
I'm scared.
Look up his game log from 2021, and it is not pretty.
No. 9
touchdowns, 11 interceptions, played the majority of the games, I think 14, I want to say. So he's just not the answer, man. No. Speaking of, let's go ahead and move on to the Bears at the Giants. And Justin Fields, how about him, huh? 8 completions on 17 pass attempts for 106 yards and 2 interceptions. Wowee. So I know, you have your barf bag ready?
I need to get it ready.
My goodness. Yeah, we thought week 1 was a fluke because of the weather, and that's completely fair, completely reasonable. Fun fact, that was his best game of the season. He actually threw 2 touchdowns in that absolute slobber fest of rain. But I'll say this. Now, 3 weeks in, he hasn't completed more than 8 passes in a game and hasn't attempted more than 17 passes either. 3 total touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Both him and his his pass catchers are unplayable. Yeah. Just like straight up. You can't play Justin Fields. If you were playing him, you were like in the deepest of leagues or the most down bad at quarterback imaginable. So I don't know how you found yourself in that position. Maybe a dynasty league where you traded away your assets, but no, regardless, his pass catchers, Darnell Mooney, big preseason breakout candidate. He can't possibly produce with this volume that Justin Fields is being allowed to have. So it's just not viable. Cole Kmet, drop him. Darnell Mooney, if you're 3-0, if you're 2-1, maybe you can hold on to him. If you're 0-3, drop him, please, because you're not doing yourself any favors keeping him.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the running backs quickly. So David Montgomery, he has a knee and an ankle injury, I believe on the same leg. Considered day-to-day, which surprises me a little bit. I would monitor his status closely because that just seems like the mechanism for a running back not being able to produce. I mean, you kind of need your knee and your ankle when you're a running back. Yeah. If it were a quarterback, I'd be like, you can stand in the pocket, deliver some good passes. But for a running back, that's just not really a recipe for success. So someone that I think is in a great position to capitalize on this, and we saw it last week, was Khalil Herbert. 30.9 fantasy points, 20 carries for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns, also caught 2 balls for 12 yards. He performed tremendously in Montgomery's absence. And to give some context on how desolate running back is this season, Khalil Herbert is running back 8 overall.
Off of one big game.
Right. Now, granted, 3 games played, but I mean, Come on. When Jamal Williams and Khalil Herbert are inside the top 8, we've got a problem. But he is a must start if Montgomery misses, so monitor that status. Moving on to the Giants, Saquon Barkley, your RB1. Now, granted, like we keep mentioning, everyone else is underperforming, but he is finding a way to get it done. 22.6 fantasy points, had 14 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown, 4 catches on 4 targets for 45 yards. He's delivering on his ADP and then some right now. So I don't see how you pivot away from him. You can't sell high. I think this is going to be more the norm. I don't expect him to finish as RB1, but he's got a good head start on the field. So he's got that going for him. Unfortunately, we have to discuss Sterling Shepard's ACL injury. Happened very late in the game. It was really unfortunate. His season's over. And then what does this leave for the pass catchers on this team? I mean, Kadarius Toney can't play on the field. He can't stay healthy to play. Kenny Golladay is getting like 3 snaps a game. 3 snaps.
Jeez.
I mean, the next man up is Richie James, who I don't remember if we talked about him or not last season.
Or last week.
Or not last season, but last week, yes. And his career has like completely been obscure because he's been like just kind of wallowing away on the San Francisco roster for the past 4 seasons, I want to say. But now he's like their number 1 guy. He's been getting double-digit fantasy points for multiple weeks, just kind of hovering around 10 points every week. Not a ton of upside there, not yet at least. And so, like in really deep leagues, I would say keep an eye on him.
Yeah, he might be worth picking up, but it's Saquon and nobody else as far as who's making your starting lineup.
Richie James is like rostered in like 2.5% of leagues.
That's way too low.
He's is it too low? Honestly,
yes.
I mean, yes, no, you're right.
Now I see it's 16%. So maybe yesterday waivers upped that a bit, but no, I agree. Yeah. I know what you're about to say. It's not like I'm super intrigued, but you might as well take a shot because if whoever's at the bottom of your bench, I feel like you probably have a better chance of thinking that this guy can take even more of a role after Sterling Shepard has been.
Yeah, here's a fun little name game for you. Would you rather have Darnell Mooney or Richie James?
I get Richie James. I don't know. Probably Richie James because of you can't have a wide receiver on a team that is completing 8 passes a game.
Right. Yeah, I mean, unless they're all 8 of them are going to Darnell Mooney, which they aren't.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and pick this game. I see you have chosen the Giants as the home favorite. Yeah. I can't disagree with you. I think that just all around, unless Justin Fields gets unleashed in this game and throws for more than, 20 passes, maybe they can get something done. But it just looks like the Bears are not good. And that's not really surprising whenever they don't really invest in their young quarterback, any talent around him. I mean, it was just announced that Byron Pringle is heading to IR. That's not a significant loss, I would say, but it's just one less person to catch the balls that are rarely getting thrown there. Yeah. So we're going with the Giants on this one.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about Titans at the Colts. So here's some good news. Derrick Henry actually kind of looked like Derrick Henry, but there's a bit of a twist here. He got 6 targets and 5 catches for 58 yards in this game. So it's really great to see an increased role in the passing game. However, it seems to be coming at the detriment, we'll say, to the remaining pass catchers on this team. When Derrick Henry is the team leader in receptions, we have a problem, right? So Robert Woods had 12.5 fantasy points. He got 4 catches on 9 targets. You like that, for 85 yards. But it just feels like there's no upside in this passing offense. I mean, Robert Woods is on the later half of his career by no stretch of the meaning. But, I mean, come on. This team just looks like it has no offense outside of Derrick Henry. And speaking of, Treylon Burks, man, 2 targets. He had 1 catch for 13 yards, finished with 3.1 fantasy points. Is he a hold or a fold? Because I'm right now I'm thinking of my boy Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to hold him and know when to fold him. What's going on
I
here?
think you have to keep a hold of Treylon Burks. I mean, this is really weird. This is his the game where he's had the least targets and least receptions, but he kind of considerably had the highest snap percentage in this game. So weird, but if anyone's gonna find consistency, I feel like it's gonna be the rookie that they invested in. So hold on to him. Although I'm not excited about that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's kind of similar to. It's not as desperate as the Darnell Mooney situation, but I feel like if you're in a position where you need to pick up a player, he's probably the lowest on your bench, and
Yeah.
I mean I wouldn't fault you for picking him up for or for dropping him for a Zay Jones or
Sure.
a player like that. So we're already past waivers, of course, but just worth mentioning. I think that people need to realize that there may not be anyone in this passing game that's worth rostering, and that's kind of concerning.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Colts now. Man, another disappointing game for Jonathan Taylor owners, or managers rather. But 12.1 fantasy points. He did get the workload. 21 carries, only had 71 yards. 3 catches on 5 targets for 20 yards. So good to see his workload increase from last week's 10-touch game, which is just completely unacceptable. That is a horrible mismanagement of that offense. But this team actually surprised probably everyone by beating the Chiefs. So I don't know what to make of this team right now. They really struggled against the Texans and absolutely got crushed by the Jaguars. So the fact that they then turned around and beat the Chiefs was a huge shock to me, and I'm sure many others. Also want to quickly mention Alec Pierce, who in his first game back, I believe, is that correct? He missed.
Yeah,
he missed week 2. So
Which that,
with a concussion.
let me say that, and I always have to get his name in. But Pittman and Pierce were both out in that week 2 game where they got demolished by the Jaguars. So don't forget that, but it was still embarrassing.
Yeah. So that being said, Alec Pierce got 9.1 fantasy points, played 45% of the snaps. I think he's worth monitoring on waivers if he's available in your league, because we saw Ashton Doolin have a great game. Obviously, Pittman was absent for that one. Don't get started on that. But I still think that Pierce has some upside in this offense, and so I'm monitoring him because I think he looks like a good player. So we're both picking the Colts in this one. The Titans look really bad. Of course, managed to beat the Raiders last week, and I know you're pumping your fist in the air for that one, but yeah, I don't know. It just this to me seems like a game that's just going to be not good.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next one though. Chargers, who, by the way, also stunk last week, and the Texans. So Austin Eckler, I got beef here, man. 13.3 fantasy points. He got 56% of the snaps, 12 total touches. What are the Chargers doing with him? He got 8 catches. That's awesome. But how do you get 4 carries for 5 yards with Austin Eckler? You know that Sony Michel had more carries than him? He had 5, but had more carries than Austin Eckler? What are they doing?
That's weird. I don't know what they're doing, but again, just his receiving work keeps his floor high, but that's gross. I don't know what they're doing with him. I mean, they were without Keenan Allen last week, right? So
Yes.
effectively, they're like, all right, Austin Eckler, you're a wide receiver this game, with how they used him. So it's weird.
I guess
but,
so.
That's the versatility that you like in him, even if this isn't exactly how you like to see it, but that's versatility.
Yeah, well, like I said at the top of the show, don't panic on all these early round running backs. They're going to figure it out, but it's just worth mentioning, man.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how you mishandle one of your most talented players, especially down one of your best players in Keenan Allen. Like, Austin Eckler should be getting 15 carries, 12, 15 carries a game, and this kind of receiving look, these kind of targets in every week. It's just like, I don't know how they don't manage to do that. But anyway, I'm not a head coach. I wouldn't know. Let's talk about the pass catchers. Obviously, Keenan Allen did miss this game with a hamstring injury. fantasy managers are really missing Keenan Allen, man. He is such a reliable talent on teams every year, and right now I know several people who are missing him, and he is expected to return to practice this week. Monitor his status. It would be a big addition to this pass catching offense. Mike Williams caught one ball for a touchdown, which kind of saved his day.
Weird.
And then Jalen Guyton, he tore his ACL in this game. So Joshua Palmer is looking more enticing. He got just under 16 fantasy points, 9 targets, 6 catches, 99 yards. He has been a double-digit fantasy scorer in back-to-back weeks. And if Allen misses week 4, I'm definitely okay flexing Joshua Palmer. Of course, when Keenan Allen returns, I think his role is kind of more up in the air, kind of like a KJ Osborne or a Tyler Boyd. Definitely not as reliable as he has been in the games that Allen has missed, but that is worth monitoring as the week progresses. Let's talk about the Texans now, who... Let's go ahead and give a round of applause for Dameon Pierce. He finally took this role. 18.1 fantasy points, 20 carries, 80 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches on 2 targets for 21 yards. That's really reassuring that, if you didn't panic early on Dameon Pierce, if you didn't drop him, or, I don't know how you could have afforded to trade him that early in the season, but it seems like his workload is increasing in a positive way, and it's translating on the field. And I think that he's probably a flex play in this game. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to look at those numbers, 22 touches for a running back, and say you can't start him. I'd like to see him consistently do that. But yeah, I think you're getting a little too picky if you don't start a player who just did that. A rookie, no less.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And on that same note, I agree with you that the Chargers are going to win this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just going to bounce back from the loss against the Jaguars from last week.
Yeah, they have to.
I think Herbert will get it done, and, if Keenan Allen's active too, that helps even more.
True that. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about the Browns at the Falcons for this next one. I want to talk about Amari Cooper. 23.1 fantasy points. He had 11 targets, 7 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown. This is back-to-back weeks with double-digit targets, specifically 101 yards and a touchdown. So is Cooper legit in this offense? We were kind of concerned about him opening week.
I'd say yeah. I think you have to look at him as a player that's legit. I mean, 2 out of his 3 games, his 2 most recent games have been great. Jacoby Brissett obviously favors him out of all the other pass catchers, although we're about to talk about someone he just threw the ball more to in this particular game. But yeah, I think Amari Cooper is...
more completions too, but not more.
Yes, that's true. But I think Amari Cooper is legit. I mean, that's... those are wide receiver 2, even wide receiver 1 numbers in back-to-back weeks.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You can't look at that and be like, oh, but it's not a great quarterback, or they're a team that runs the ball a lot. He's getting those numbers, so.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think with Amari Cooper, he does have a tendency to have these kind of boom-bust weeks, week to week. Definitely not the most consistent player in fantasy by any means, but in terms of the volume that he's seeing recently, it is reassuring if you roster him. That he may be returning on his ADP and kind of increasing in value, we'll say, in trade discussions. Yeah. So the man that you were referring to, David Njoku, he had 9 catches on 10 targets for 89 yards and a touchdown. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to pour a little bit of water on this fire. Yeah. This is his best game since week 5 of 2021 by more than 10 points. So... it's great. He had a great game. That's wonderful. Is he the next guy to take over the tight end role in fantasy leagues? Probably not. Now, if this kind of usage sustains, which I don't expect it to, then I'll admit that I was wrong. But I feel like based on that sample size of games between week 5 of last year and week 3 of this year, there's enough indicating that this is going to be an anomaly. This is going to be a standout game, and I'm just not I'm not sold on Njoku yet. So what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think that's fair because you're pulling from a lot of different games, but he is getting a high snap percentage and 10 targets. I'm not going to jump on him
Well, yeah, but
necessarily
who else
this
is
week.
even on the team?
I'm not. Well, that doesn't change the fact that he's got the opportunity. I'm not saying go after him this week, but if he puts up another solid week, I think that I would not fault you for going after him. But yeah, let's see what he does this week. I wouldn't be super excited, so I am more with you. Let me make that clear.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, this is a player that a lot of his career, he's had another tight end there that's been relevant. So maybe we can see an emergence for someone. He's only 26, and they don't have a lot of people in front of him. So that's the only thing I'm saying that could provide more potential games like this.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Let's talk about the Falcons on this one. So Cordero Patterson, 22.3 fantasy points. He's looking more like a running back than he was later in the season. But the thing that I'm referencing is 17 carries, 141 yards, a touchdown, only one catch on one target for 12 yards. So 2 out of the 3 games so far this season, he has had 120 or more rushing yards and a touchdown. So is this like early season Patterson where, last year he broke out and was like a waiver wire league winner potential guy? Or is this something that you can expect to sustain season long?
I think you can never say you expect something to sustain season long for Cordero Patterson, but the fact that he's being used as a running back and doing these numbers, and it's not just baked into just, basically wide receiver production alongside of it, I think that does make you feel safer.
More of a
about
Deebo
him.
Samuel type role.
Yeah. I think that makes you feel safer about it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you from that perspective. My concern, I guess, is just his advanced age relative to other running backs in the league. And I'll ask a secondary question to you is like, what do you do if you roster Patterson? Obviously, this is a running back in a league that is struggling to produce at that position. So I don't know if there is really a sell high opportunity here, because what are you going to get,
I mean, you can always try. He's currently RB6 in PPR scoring, so you're starting him if you have him, I would say. And some people might be like, oh yeah, I only remember the good parts of Patterson's season last year. Here he is again. Why did I not draft him? I think that's a possible narrative for someone that would be willing to trade for him. So,
potentially.
But I agree. I think a lot of people do know that Patterson is just a weird player. I mean, he's 31 years old, and the first time he was even in the top, let's look at this. He's only been in the top 40 in the position for scoring his rookie season and last season. That's crazy. So
yeah, no, he is a very unique player when you look at his career.
Yeah, I guess. All right, you still have Kyle Pitts to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk about Pitts, who finally double-digit points. But hey, the Atlanta Falcons aren't interested in winning fantasy games. They're interested in winning real football games. So despite that, they used Kyle Pitts, and they won a game. So I don't know what Arthur Smith is going to do with that information, but I'm hoping that they keep it up, because Kyle Pitts was drafted relatively early for tight ends. Obviously not in the realm of Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce, but he was the next guy up typically. And so people who invested in him need more games like this, hoping that it comes moving forward. Let's go ahead and pick this game now. This is one where I might go against you.
Well, I'm feeling the Falcons, so maybe you are going to go with me.
No, I'm going to go Cleveland.
Right.
This is one where I feel comfortable taking the opposite that you do on this one. To me, I think Cleveland is just probably going to run down the Falcons' throat on this one. Obviously, I could be wrong. I would be not happy about that. But the Browns are actually 1-point favorites on the road here, so if that's any indication, hopefully that works out.
I do agree with the spread that it's close, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Let's hand this off to you.
All right, I'll take over. So First game I'll talk about is Commanders at Cowboys. So with the Commanders, they got destroyed against the Eagles last week, so I'll just say the Eagles are legit, and we'll talk about them more later. But tough day for the Commanders. Carson Wentz got sacked 9 times. That's not ideal for him.
That's a lot of sacks.
Yeah. And yet, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Jahan Dotson all saw at least 8 targets. So McLaurin's a must start. I think Samuel is a very safe flex, and I think Dotson is intriguing, but you're obviously holding on to him. I don't know if I'd start him because he has been touchdowns have been the thing that has been putting him into double digits consistently. Right. So we'll see what happens there. But McLaurin and Samuel are safe production without touchdowns, and the fact that Wentz got sacked 9 times against a good team and still threw the ball and targeted those players that much, I think is reassuring for their values. Do you agree?
I do, and I'm looking at Dotson's game log here. 2 catches on 8 targets for 10 yards is obviously not something you like to see, but the targets are there, and that is reassuring. So I think they bounce back, obviously, against the Cowboys this week, although I would say of those 3, I'm least confident in Dotson as you are.
And just to briefly talk about Antonio Gibson, even though we've kind of hated on him all season, regardless on if he did really well or not fantasy-wise, he scored a rushing touchdown and only had 11 fantasy points, so that means 5 points outside of the touchdown. Not good. And I think Brian Robinson's return is... I don't think it's this week. I don't know exactly what the timeline is for that, but it's getting closer and closer. And
yeah, so I just want to quickly say, like, I've read that his expected time or return timeline is week 5, but there's no real reports from the team that are really being forthcoming with when he's expected to be back. But it's like, he got placed on injured reserve at the beginning of the year, and so he had to miss those first 4 games. So yeah, that is kind of a question mark still.
Yeah, so we saw Wentz negatively regress, but we're seeing 2, maybe even 3 pass catchers that are fantasy valuable in this team, and that's more than I think anyone expected going into the season. So that's reassuring for sure. But we can move on to the Cowboys. Monitor Dak Prescott's thumb injury, because last I checked, he claimed it's more likely he'll play in week 5 rather than week 4, but I think there still is a possibility. Yeah. But bank on Cooper Rush playing.
He just got those stitches taken out of his hand. Sorry to cut you off, but it is much more likely that he'll be back in week 5 rather than this week. Because of that, it's going to be a little too soon, I think, to force him back into game action. But with Jerry Jones, he might be rolling him out there just no matter what's going on.
It wouldn't be wise to do so. I mean, Cooper Rush, I think I saw, is undefeated as a starter for the Cowboys. That's kind of an interesting stat. I think that's only like 4 or 5 games, but that is interesting.
I saw a really funny tweet the other day saying, and apologies because I can't credit the person who said it, but because I don't know who they are. But anyway, it was basically saying, hey, Cooper Rush better be careful. He's going to be playing for the Panthers.
I saw that tweet too. That is funny.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll continue with this, like the injury reports for the Cowboys, because they have quite a few. Monitor Dalton Schultz knee injury, which kept him out of week 3. So keep an eye on that. I think they had 2 rookies that they played at the tight end, but you're not really looking to add either of them. You just want Schultz when he gets back. Monitor Michael Gallup's knee injury, as he could make a season debut this week. That changes a lot of things. I'm not even talking about Noah Brown, I think is his name specifically, who's been relevant unexpectedly wide receiver wise. Let's see what happens when Michael Gallup comes back. CeeDee Lamb had a really good game, a great touchdown catch, so let's give him props because we hate on him a lot previously because he did have a good game. But
yes.
Yeah, I mean, we still looked at him as a wide receiver 1, but definitely on the lower end for sure. But yeah, this is a wide receiver 1 game right here, so good job, CeeDee Lamb. I don't want to be unfair to you. So
No, that's completely fair. Yeah, I'm with you.
Talking about the running backs, it's kind of the theme of this Cowboys team. We're always talking about these 2 and how it was last season too. Ezekiel Elliott, 14.5 fantasy points, 15 carries, 73 yards and a touchdown, and 1 reception on 1 target for 2 yards. He played 64% of snaps. This was his first double-digit fantasy scoring game of the season, thanks to that touchdown. Yeah, so 64% of snaps for him, and Tony Pollard had 44% of snaps, so I guess they were on the field together at some point. But Tony Pollard had 0 receptions on 1 target, but ran for 105 yards on 13 carries. So he was more efficient. I don't know if that was one big run, but usually Pollard's taken away receiving work from Zeke, which hurts him, and it's not like Zeke got a ton from this, but that hurts Pollard's independent value if he's not getting that receiving work, because 105 yards and that's all your points would be kind of disappointing. But you're not really looking to start him anyways with Zeke being there, and Zeke is still getting those goal line carries, which keeps them ahead of Pollard consistently. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I was just checking. He had a 46-yard rush early in the second quarter. So kind of a big play that inflated those numbers, but still, I mean, they all count the same. So
yeah.
We're both picking the Cowboys for this one. They're the home favorite, 3 points over the Commanders. The Commanders are just like, their defense is so bad. Yeah. So I think, honestly, what it really comes down to is that I think Cooper Rush is going to be good enough to get the job done. Their defense is pretty formidable, especially Micah Parsons. He's a great player, great pass rusher. And so I think the Commanders might be in trouble in terms of protecting Carson Wentz for a consecutive week.
Yeah, and we're talking about how many fantasy relevant wide receivers on the Commanders there are because of the game script they're always in. So I guess you got to remember that. All right, we'll move on to Jaguars at Eagles. Another Jaguars upset? We'll see.
Oh,
probably
dude,
not.
Bold
I'm going to go ahead and pick the Eagles. I'll just say that now. But let me do my analysis for the Jaguars. So surprisingly big win over the Chargers, as we already said. I mean, they're missing Keenan Allen, and I know they've had quite a few defensive injuries, I've heard, for a team that was touted to be one of the best defenses because of all the free agent acquisitions they had in the offseason. So I don't even know all the names off the top of my head, but I've just seen a lot of reports about injuries for the Chargers. But
you're an offense
guy.
Yeah,
exactly.
You don't really follow.
But let's talk about the Jaguars themselves, because they had multiple relevant fantasy producers. James Robinson, as someone who has Travis Etienne, I hate reading this, but 20.6 fantasy points for Robinson, 17 carries for 100 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, 3 receptions, 16 yards, 58% of snaps. No one really thought that this would happen. They thought it'd be the ETN show, and ETN did get double-digit scoring. Did get a double-digit score, 10.5 fantasy points. Had 3 receptions on 3 targets as well. 13 carries for 45 yards. That's not bad usage, but he's clearly behind James Robinson.
Yeah. I mean, James Robinson looks electric when he's on the field, and that is exactly why he's taken this role from ETN. I just hope that, if you drafted Travis Etienne earlier in drafts, that you snagged James Robinson as that handcuff, and if you did, it turned out to work out really well for you. I did that in one of my ESPN leagues, and I have started James Robinson since week 2 and had Etienne on the bench, because it's just a clear split that Robinson's their guy, and as long as that is the case, it's going to be James Robinson's role to lose. So yeah, I definitely understand the pain that you're feeling in terms of drafting someone super early and just not working.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Etienne's completely absent. He's just clearly behind Robinson. Like, because it's 60-40, roughly. Mm-hmm. So if anything would change, I don't know why they would, though. So that's what makes it difficult to be super optimistic about Etienne's outlook.
Probably have to take an injury.
Yeah. Christian Kirk is the wide receiver 6 in PPR scoring. That's a fun fact. If you drafted him late as kind of a sleeper, not like he was super late, but you definitely drafted him as a bench player, you got to be ecstatic right now, and it seems legit. I mean, this.
How about the Jaguars? They have to be thrilled.
Yeah.
I mean, they make his contract. So him and Kenny Golladay have similar contracts, if not identical contracts.
Wow.
Try that one on for size. I mean, the Jaguars have to be absolutely stoked that they got Christian Kirk, because he is delivering, and this team looks like really surprisingly good this season. So let's go ahead and talk about Zay Jones.
Zay Jones, someone I targeted on the waivers in both of my leagues. He had 24.5 fantasy points, 10 receptions on 11 targets, and a receiving touchdown, 85 yards. I mean, this has been a player that's been in the league for a little bit and hasn't been super consistently relevant, but it's clear that he
that's generous to say.
Yeah, it's clear that he's I know the biggest highlight in my eyes of Zay Jones is he got up from the ground. I don't know if you've seen that clip. Got up from the ground really cool. Look it up after this, or look it up now if you're listening. It's really cool.
Maybe edit it into the video.
Yeah.
Because I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's really cool. I hope I'm thinking of the right person, but
oh man, that's really cool.
it's so cool.
Well, regardless, put it in the video because I want to know what you're talking about.
24 targets on Zay Jones across the first 3 games. He's legit in my eyes.
Seems legit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wide receiver 2 behind Christian Kirk. I would like to think that Lawrence can support 2 wide receivers, so I think he's legit.
I know, and it's really funny that like we're talking about these 2 guys in this offense because before the season started, you looked at the roster and you're like, man, who's gonna catch the football for them?
Yeah.
So these guys are performing, and as the season progresses, you got to adjust. If it's happening on the field, that's where you got to put it in your fantasy rosters.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the Eagles, and I'll really just focus on Devontae Smith. I think he might have won NFC Offensive Player of the Week with 30.9 fantasy points, 8 receptions on 12 targets and a receiving touchdown, and 169 receiving yards. Wow, that's a lot better.
Solid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The college Heisman winner back in his day, and he had 0 receptions in week 1, and now he did this. So I guess I'll ask you, you think, not like a performance like this, but he's legit in this team to be just right behind A.J. Brown most weeks? He wasn't this week, and be consistent?
I would like to say yes, because I think that Jalen Hurts is really improving as a quarterback. Yeah. Obviously, the rushing numbers are still high, and that's helping his floor remain high as well. But, Jalen Hurts seems to be an improved passer, and that's what we were hoping for this preseason, this offseason, talking about Jalen Hurts, that if he could make that next step, that he could kind of flirt with elite status at QB. So, he's looking like one of the best options outside of Lamar Jackson, of course. But, I think that Devonta Smith is going to be a safe play most weeks, at the very worst, as a flex.
Yeah, so I definitely would not say sell high, because I think it's going to be legit. I mean, if someone's like really excited about this one game, but I don't think anyone's going to be doing that because A.J. Brown's there.
Right,
so.
An Alabama fan, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
They've got plenty to choose from.
Yeah.
So.
But as you said, Jalen Hurts is proving himself, so A.J. Brown proves to be reliable again. And the only negative for this team, which they didn't really need to do anything outside of Devontae Smith, it seems, because of how well he did, but Miles Sanders kind of got lost in the background, and he's only averaging 2 receptions per game, so that limits his floor. Mm-hmm. We're liking how he's looking this season more than previous seasons, just because he's actually found the end zone once this season, which is better than last season already. But it's
100% improvement.
When Hurts runs and also doesn't throw a lot of touchdowns, and doesn't throw a lot of passes to Miles Sanders specifically, it hurts his floor. But I mean, he is involved in this team, and he is the clear RB1 in the team. But it's a team of Jalen Hurts. It's just like talking about Ravens running backs. There's only so much upside that you can say.
Limited upside. Yeah.
But we both think the Eagles 100%. Are going to win this game and continue to be undefeated.
Yeah, I think the Jaguars got away with a lot against the Chargers last week. And I just don't think the Eagles, with their defense as it stands, the Chargers are a little banged up on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, missing Joey Bosa, of course, and J.C. Jackson. So I think it's a different defense that the Jaguars are coming up against this week. And, of course, Eagles at home, rather, has proven very tough. So thus far. So going Eagles with this one.
Yep. All right, we'll move on to Bills at Ravens, which should be a good game.
So that's going to be the number 1 game of the week, I hope.
Yeah, and we already talked about the Bills a little bit. They lost against the Dolphins last week, but we still view them very highly. And Lamar Jackson's going off, but I'll talk about some players in specific. Isaiah McKenzie, I know you dropped him, so this is going to be a little bit of a fun discussion, but he had 21.2 fantasy points. 51% of snaps. That probably shows how I actually feel about him, but do you think this is legit?
So no, I don't, and here's why. And this is why I don't feel bad at all for dropping him, because one, I know you were wrong. But no, Isaiah McKenzie, like you said, 51% of the snaps. Here's the thing. I was never considering starting him to begin with. He was bench depth on my team. I I dropped him for Sterling Shepard, who obviously was seeming like he had more upside on the Giants roster with how their pass catchers are going. Obviously, it looks bad now that Sterling Shepard tore his ACL, but I don't knock the process because Isaiah McKenzie did absolutely nothing when Gabriel Davis didn't play in week 2.
Yeah.
And only getting 51% of the snaps is not a reliable usage for any fantasy wide receiver. So, no, I'm not really torn up about dropping McKenzie. No one has claimed him, so I could always turn around and pick him right back up, but I really won't because the usage that he's getting is not reliable. So let's move off of that because I think honestly it's noise. It's not.
I agree. So we'll talk about Devin Singletary because usually I'm harping on this backfield, but he had 24.1 fantasy points, 9 carries for 13 yards. That's not where we got him. He got him for 9 receptions on 11 targets and 1 receiving touchdown for 78 yards. He was in the 50% range for snap count in week 1 and 2, and then did 73% in week 3. I think you still have to keep an eye on him and not get too excited. I mean, this is kind of his form going into the end of last season was amazing, but he hasn't really picked it back up yet. So let's see if he can continue it. So I would be cautious of Singletary, but you love to see this, especially if you started him last week.
Yeah, but let's keep in mind though, because we talked about it with the Bills on the Dolphins only having 39 offensive plays. Josh Allen had 42 completions for 63 pass attempts in this game. He threw the ball 63 times. So are these numbers a little overinflated? I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe take it with a little less. Put an asterisk on it because there was way too much passing volume in this game that these players aren't going to really ever achieve those numbers again.
Yeah, and I completely agree. It's just still good to see him get receiving work, even if it is inflated, because previously he had only had 2 receptions each game. Yeah. So the fact that you can see he can do it in this passing offense, that's the only thing I'll pull away, but I agree. Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and maybe it's an indication that Zach Moss is going to be playing a little bit less. Obviously, James Cook only played in 12% of snaps, but maybe if anything, it's an indication that Singletary is kind of taking that leadership role back in that backfield, and that would be a good sign for managers of that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Cook, he got his first receptions with 4 in this game. Again, a little bit inflated, but he hadn't registered a reception before this week. So, if he gets more involved there, that's bad for Singletary, but good for him. But again, we just got to see a week where Josh Allen doesn't throw the ball that many times. All right, let's talk about the Ravens.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson. Wow. I am so glad.
Fantasy MVP.
I'm so glad I drafted him. He's like single-handedly carrying my team right now. He almost has QB1 numbers without his rushing yards and RB1 numbers without his passing yards. I saw a tweet about that. That is insane. He is fantasy MVP right now. I agree. And Mark Andrews.
He's 5th.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say he's 5th in the league among all players in rushing.
Yeah. That's just insane. And he didn't even rush a whole lot in week 1, but then he had back-to-back 100-plus rushing yard games. He's playing for his money that he decided to hold off.
Oh, hell yeah.
With until this next offseason. So, yeah. Mark Andrews boomed.
100%.
So that's great for him. But Rashad Bateman, I was a little bit concerned about him last week on if he could keep it up because it was kind of back-to-back long receiving touchdowns. And here we see he had 5.9 fantasy points, 2 receptions on 4 targets for 59 yards, so still pretty efficient with that, but 1 fumble as well. Yeah. I'm not going to say I'm super worried about Bateman because I think that Lamar is passing so well that you'd like to think that Bateman has a safer floor than this, but I don't want him just to be reliant on a deep touchdown. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to look up Lamar's passing numbers. I think he's just being really efficient.
He is being really efficient. I think there was a point in time in that game where he had 4 passing touchdowns with fewer than 200 passing yards. I don't know how it ended up being, but I think that was...
No, yeah, you're right on that because, I mean, he hasn't eclipsed 30 pass attempts any game this year, and so that's low volume. It's going to be kind of more difficult for guys like Bateman and Devin Duvernay to really get their numbers up in the pass game. I mean, obviously Mark Andrews is going to be fine. He's going to get the majority of the passing volume, but yeah, for some of those other pass catchers, it could be tough in this offense if they don't deliver on a touchdown, for them to have a reliable floor, just based on how Lamar Jackson is running this team.
Yeah. And with J.K. Dobbins, he made his 2022 season debut, 6 fantasy points on 9 touches. So I guess all I'll say for him is keep an eye on him. Again, with the way Lamar's playing, it's not like you're super excited about having a running back, but if he trends in the right direction and gets higher usage because he is coming back from an injury, that could be good. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. No, I would say, if you got through the first 2 weeks without him and you're okay, then you probably weren't starting him this week, and hopefully you didn't. I don't know. This one's tough because with where he was going in drafts, he might have been your second RB. So it's tough to say. But this is not a situation that I envy by any means, rostering J.K. Dobbins. Yeah, it's a wait and see for me.
I think this is going to be a really good game, but I'm going to take the Bills. I think that they're going to limit Lamar Jackson enough to make him less efficient, and that's going to hurt that offense, but I think it's going to be a really good game.
Yeah, I think given how the Bills really underperformed last week, that they're going to be looking to come into this game and, like you said, limit Lamar Jackson's rushing ability, hopefully for their sake. But yeah, no, I'm picking the Bills with you. They are the 3-point favorite on the road, which I find a little interesting. But I think it's just because it's the Buffalo Bills, man. They're one of the best teams in the league.
Legit. We'll move on to the first afternoon game. We'll talk about Cardinals at Panthers. Cardinals are... I can't believe that they are the 1.5 point underdog in this game. And I'll just say it right now. I'm picking them.
Against Carolina.
I'm picking them over the Panthers. But let me talk about some specific Cardinals players.
Yeah.
Marquise Brown, 28 fantasy points. He had 17 targets. You know how that makes me feel. 14 receptions, 140 yards. I'm not going to say that's reliable, but obviously Kyler likes Marquise Brown, and they had that prior connection playing together in college. So this is kind of more of what you were hoping for, of the type of fantasy point total for Marquise Brown to boom like this. And
let me ask you real quick.
Yeah.
I know this is kind of off script, but I just wonder if this is a sell high opportunity, because I'm wondering whenever DeAndre Hopkins returns from suspension in week 7. We talked about this in the preseason, that the pass catchers on this team, obviously Rondale Moore has yet to play in the regular season, but we talked about Rondale Moore, we talked about Marquise Brown.
Didn't talk about Greg Dortch.
Kind of up. Well, nobody was. But in terms of an upside play through those first 6 weeks, once Hopkins returns, I'm a little concerned that these kind of games are going to be more few and far between for these other pass catchers, just because DeAndre Hopkins demands a good share of the targets because he's arguably the most talented player on the team.
Yeah.
So I would not blink twice if someone were to try to sell high on Marquise.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good opportunity. If you want to be risky, wait and see if he has another good week this week, but maybe do it before this week. I think people are kind of forgetting.
This would be the worst team to do it
against.
I know.
I think don't trade him to the team that has DeAndre Hopkins, of course, because I feel like a lot of other people may be forgetting that is a looming return and that it's imminent. It's week 7 that he's eligible to come back? Yeah.
He's out for the first 6 weeks.
So that's still more than half the season to go.
Yep.
So Greg Dortch, 17 points, 10 targets. Wow. But monitor Rondale Moore's hamstring injury because it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I think it's more likely that Moore plays in week 5 than week 4. But I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think about Dortch until I see what happens with Rondale Moore, because it would be weird to think that Moore is just going to take the back seat to Dortch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that whenever Rondale Moore does return, if I've been using Greg Dortch in my lineup, I'm probably going to bench him just on the off chance that he disappears.
Yeah.
We just don't know. And so with where you got Dortch, which was off the waivers, I think you can afford to bench him whenever Rondale returns. But it's something to consider. I think you're on the right track there.
Yeah, so I'll move on to the Panthers, who we've already trashed on before even getting to them officially. Baker Mayfield had 12 completions.
Hey.
And yet...
Was that in the first half? Or
Nope, entire game.
First quarter?
The entire game.
Oh, okay.
And yet they're
That's
a
not very
favorite.
good.
I don't understand. DJ Moore... I mean, okay, McCaffrey's not... I'm just trying to go down the list of players. McCaffrey has not been astounding, but he's still getting you double digits. You're still starting him, of course.
Yeah.
Robbie Anderson has not replicated his week one performance because DJ Moore can't even get anything going. DJ Moore had 2.5 fantasy points.
Well, it's all on Baker.
Well, yes, that's what I'm saying.
He's one of the most inefficient starting quarterbacks.
If Moore can't get it done because of how Baker's playing, Robbie Anderson's definitely not getting it done either. DJ Moore had 2.5 fantasy points, 1 catch for 2 yards. He had more rushes. He had 2 rushes for 13 yards, more rushes than receptions. He was targeted 6 times, which I think has happened every single game. This is a little mini rant. Do you think that... this is tough to say because it's Baker at QB, and it seems like he might be the problem after all the things that have happened of players that left the Browns last season, like Odell and did well, and Baker coming here not doing any better. But all that being said, could DJ Moore still be looked at as a buy low?
Gosh. The problem is I don't know if anyone would be willing to trade him at that value, you know?
Yeah.
Like, because what are you going to get for DJ Moore? DJ Moore has name value that, I mean, he's had, 4 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, if not more, right?
He's legit. I thought he'd...
I know. It's totally Baker and this offense, but... let me look up his history.
If this team if Baker doesn't get better, or more likely this team doesn't get a better quarterback in DJ Moore's career, that's going to be one of the biggest wasted talents I've ever witnessed. Because
okay, so he's coming off 3 consecutive 1,100 plus receiving yard seasons. He is not on a good pace to even come close to that at this point.
2 this week.
I think. I think based on... Did I say this week?
No, I'm just saying, he's not on pace because of what he did this week.
Right, yeah. So, I do think Baker's the problem. And I remember saying in the preseason that we've never seen Baker really support a top wide receiver. Obviously, he's in a different system than he was in Cleveland, but, man, 12 completions, like you mentioned, is just not going to get it done for anybody. No. So, including... Christian McCaffrey, who's not really getting used how we expected him to be when drafting him at the number 2 spot or number 1 spot if you were a little bit more risk-taking. I think as of right now, you got to bench these guys, obviously excluding McCaffrey. And for that reason, I'm with you. I think that the Cardinals will win this game despite being 1.5-point underdogs. The Cardinals are not great, but they're not that bad.
I think they've been the underdog every game this season.
They have been, by betting odds, they have been the underdog.
And
that is correct.
They are 1-2, so that doesn't seem ridiculous there, but still.
But no, Carolina, I don't think Carolina's going to be the ones that beat them. This would be a fun one to pick against you, but since I am already behind in the picks, I'm not going to just throw one away for this one. So, I'm going with the Cardinals on you, with this one on you, with you. Sorry. Let's go and move on.
All right, let's ride, because it's time to talk about the most exciting offense in the NFL. Broncos at Raiders divisional matchup. The 2-1 deserving, of course, Broncos versus the 0-3 deserving, of course, Raiders.
The sarcasm is just dripping.
Yeah.
It's pooling underneath.
I mean, maybe add the Broncos punter. I think he had a really good week. All jokes aside,
what's wrong with you?
The only touchdown scored was by Melvin Gordon. So that's great because most people probably started Javonte Williams ahead of him. Gordon had 38% of snaps. Javonte Williams had 45% of snaps. Javonte Williams had 18 touches. Gordon had 17. I mean, this is kind of how it felt like last season. I feel like if this offense is more productive, you of course want Javonte Williams more, but Melvin Gordon's still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Melvin Gordon is like one of the most talented backups in the NFL. Yeah. He would make the number 1 spot on a lot of rosters in the league right now, but he is he's on this team, and he's kind of cannibalizing Javonte Williams' value. That being said, you can't stop starting Javonte Williams, I would argue, despite how just piss poor this team looks on offense. You can't stop starting Javonte, and I don't know, can you really, with 38% of the snaps, can you justify flexing Melvin Gordon?
Not really. I think he benefited from this
really.
team not doing too well because he's taken more of the backseat fantasy-wise, at least, whenever this offense has gotten a little bit more going than one touchdown. And Javonte Williams has been more involved. So, yeah, I'd say not really. I think Javonte Williams is a starter, and Gordon probably isn't, but it's going to be annoying to have him, either of them, and see weeks like this. One player that I think is a little bit more legit, it seems, is Courtland Sutton. If you decide between him and Jeudy about which wide receiver to take because their ADP was so close to each other, I think if you took Sutton, you're probably a little bit happier. I mean, Judy's had some injuries, and he did have the touchdown week 1, but Sutton had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 97 yards. That's great production for a day where they did not do a whole lot offensively. I mean, Russell Wilson didn't throw a passing touchdown, so 17.7 fantasy points for receiver. You got to feel good about that. Jerry Jeudy, I'd say don't panic too much. He's coming back from an injury that he sustained in week 2, and he had 59% of snaps in week 3, whereas he had 89% in week 1. So I would say there's probably more to the story than just the offense being bad with him specifically. So do you agree with that?
I don't know. I think the quarterback's no good, honestly. So if you watched last week's video that we did for week 3, I kind of put Carson on the hot seat about Russell Wilson, and I feel justified after this week. 9 fantasy points, just over that. 20 completions, 33 attempts, 184 yards, 6 rushes for 17 yards. Hey, he improved there. Big impact it made for the team. Honestly, the thing that I'm really the most salty about is that if Garoppolo hadn't moonwalked out of the end zone and given the Broncos 2 free points,
You would have thrown a pick 6. Come on now, that's what happened.
Why do you say that?
Because that's what happened.
Why do you say that?
He threw the ball and it was a pick 6.
No.
Either way, fluky. So yes.
Yes, I'm just saying, because I picked the 49ers to win that game. I think you got bailed out big time. And I don't know. Just either way, I think Russell Wilson's just not good. You can't start him anymore.
No.
I mean, can you at least agree on that?
Yeah.
Okay,
he's not getting the... I really don't... He's pretty good completion percentage, but he's not throwing nearly enough passing touchdowns.
Come on, you're you're reaching for stats.
I think people I think it's more of the coaching and a new system that it is Russell Wilson himself. Personally, I still think that
he's missing throws. I'm just saying. I think Courtland Sutton is definitely his favorite on that team in terms of targeting, so he might be able to stay afloat based on volume. But if you have Jeudy, if you have...
He's a top 20 wide receiver right now. I think saying he might be able to... Sutton.
Okay. I mean...
Here we go. It's the Broncos again. Let's just move on to the Raiders, honestly.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
All right. Mac Hollins. Who? He had 29.96 fantasy points, which means he must have thrown a pass, but I couldn't see that, but that's why he
did.
Okay.
For 4
Got
yards.
It. 8 receptions on 10 targets, 1 receiving touchdown, 158 yards. Hunter Renfrow was out due to his concussion. I don't even think I need to ask news or noise necessarily unless you disagree, but Mac Hollins, this is his 6th NFL season, and he had never caught more than 5 passes in a game or had more than 72 receiving yards in a game. So, news or noise?
No, that's a great stat to pull, because I think that this is mostly noise. Obviously, a good amount of targets over the past 2 weeks, but that is with Hunter Renfrow absent, and I believe that Devontae Adams' targets have they've come down back to earth since week 1, obviously, where, similar to last season, where Darren Waller came out the gates hot with, 19 targets? Or 17 potentially. But either way, yeah, the targets are being spread around a little bit more charitably, we'll say, not just force-feeding Davante Adams. That being said, Mac Hollins is... I don't see how you start him, honestly. I mean, this was total fluke. And, I think that Hunter Renfrow is going to be back sooner rather than later. And there's just too many more proven pass catchers on this team for Hollins to really sustain any kind of role. So, yeah, I'm not buying on this.
Yeah, I think he'll fall behind Davante Adams, of course, fall behind Renfrow, fall behind Waller. So, yeah, fluke. Josh Jacobs, 14.7 fantasy points, saw 5 receptions on 6 targets, and total 18 touches. He saw 1 reception on 1 target in both weeks 1 and 2, so you like this, that he got some receiving work. Maybe it was also because Renfrow was gone, so he picked up some slack there. But if he can be more consistent with his receiving work, you feel even better about him. But he gets a lot of touches. So...
Well, yeah, and I think Jacobs is good for 4 to 6 targets a game, typically. So I think they're kind of figuring it out with the new head coach, and I'm less concerned about Josh Jacobs. I mean, considering how all running backs are performing, I know we keep talking about it, but this is a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I guess Raiders.
Oh, you're gonna begrudgingly pick the Raiders?
I guess Raiders.
Oh.
I have hope.
Okay,
First divisional matchup. Maybe. I don't know. We can move on.
No, I think honestly, not to get back into it, but I think that these teams really should have opposite records. The Broncos totally deserve to be 0-3. No offense to you, I just don't see it on the field. Whereas the Raiders have been kind of just unlucky on a few, a crazy scoop and score and other things of that nature.
I know that you'll say it's because of the teams they've played, and there certainly is something to be said about that. But they haven't allowed more than 17 points against them. So there's hope for the defense. The offense just needs to get cooking. And it's not looking good.
If you believe in the defense, pick them to win.
No, because this is not the hill I'm going to die on. Although, I'm not going to say no chance. That's what I'll say, but I'm picking Raiders.
Okay. All right.
Patriots at Packers. Big underdog for your Patriots. Well, that's mainly because Mac Jones is expected to miss multiple games due to a high ankle sprain, and Brian Hoyer is the backup QB. In Green Bay, that might be a little bit tough for this team. But let's talk about these receivers, because it's been so weird. Jacoby Myers, who we thought was going to continue to be legit, didn't play in Week 3. So keep that in mind when you see Devontae Parker, boom, for 20.6 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 10 targets for 156 receiving yards. Parker had 1 catch for 9 yards on the season before this game. So... That, in conjunction with the fact that Mac Jones isn't going to be playing, do you feel like Jacoby Myers, if anyone, is the only somewhat reliable pass catcher in this offense, fantasy-wise?
Yeah, I do. Based on how they use him in that offense, he's not really, the down-the-field guy. Yeah. He's, closer to the line of scrimmage. And so, more of a safer floor with Jacoby. Devontae Parker is... kind of an interesting player in the sense that, that doesn't really surprise me a ton. He does have a boom bust type of characteristic to him, and so in the absence of Jacoby, Devontae steps up. That's great. The week before it was Nelson Aguilar. And it's really just because there's no true alpha in this receiving core. So, if you're starting any of them, I think it's Jacoby Myers. But, I would avoid it. I think that it's going to be kind of a, uglier display with Brian Hoyer. And it's mainly just the running backs that we're going to focus on next that may be making the cut for your roster. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I'll just really look at the stats of each of these players. Damian Harris, 12.6 fantasy points. 11 carries for 41 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, 2 receptions on 3 targets for 5 yards. So that is a touchdown, 13 touches on 38% of snaps, whereas Ramondre Stevenson had 20.1 fantasy points, 12 carries for 73 yards and a rushing touchdown, 4 receptions on 5 targets, 28 yards. So 16 touches, 3 more than Harris, and they both scored a touchdown. And he had 62% of snaps versus Harris's 38%. Back-to-back games for Ramondre Stevenson having a higher snap percentage and more yards per carry than Harris. And I already asked you this earlier, so I already know your answer. But
yeah,
is Ramondre Stevenson taking over?
So, I'm not sure. I feel like I still kind of believe that Damian Harris, if he's given the opportunities, is the more talented player. Obviously, this stat line doesn't indicate that, but I don't know. I honestly, I'm not really, because of how the preseason was looking with the talks of this backfield and Ramondre Stevenson kind of leeching onto this role, I was kind of fading on Patriots running backs to begin with. If you roster either of them, I think they're both touchdown-dependent flexes, honestly. So I'm not all that excited about either one of them.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's kind of what it boils down to. Obviously, the snap percentages are there to be seen, and you can take that for what it's worth. But it could, with Bill Belichick, it could be different the very next week. So, I don't know.
I think that they kind of do a thing where they trade off every drive, and Ramondre Stevens had a back-to-back drive, I think, at the end of the first half. So it's definitely interesting how they use
it gave them the edge.
Yeah. We'll see what happens to this backfield with Brian Hoyer under center, though. But let's talk about the Packers. They scored 14 points in their win against the Buccaneers. That was a bad... I tried to go Buccaneers, but they lost. But kind of a boring game, but Aaron Rodgers is without his familiar pass catchers, and Brady was out without any familiar pass catcher. So
pretty much, yeah. No offensive line to help him out. The pass catching situation was abysmal. Yeah. And, I saw the writing on the wall. I picked the Packers and managed to not take another game out from you on that one. Yeah. But we're both picking the Packers for this one. I think that, honestly, there's not a ton of upside. I mean, we're going to talk about Romeo Doubs, who seems to be emerging a little bit. But I'm still on the fence about Allen Lazard. I roster him in a couple leagues, and he just doesn't seem to be getting the volume that would justify starting him every week. He's managed to get a touchdown every game he's played, and so that's keeping his value afloat. But it's that doesn't make you feel good. So maybe Romeo Doubs is the guy. Let's go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, so the thing I'll say about Lazard real quick is 14.5 points thanks to a touchdown. So he's not doing a lot outside of getting those touchdowns. The reason I like Romeo Doubs more, which, Sunday morning, there was a brief period in time where I had Doubs in my lineup over Edmonds. That would have won me my matchup, which did not seem like the case with how Edmonds was doing. But it would have been bold, but it would have paid off. But Romeo Doubs, and keep in mind, Sammy Watkins is on IR, and Christian Watson was also out in this game. But Doubs had 89% of snaps, which was a huge increase in the first 2 games. He had 21.3 fantasy points, 8 receptions on 8 targets, 1 receiving touchdown, 73 yards. I mean, he would have had 15.3 points without the touchdown. So that's what makes me think he could be a little bit more legit. He led the team in every receiving stat. I'm excited. I have Romeo Doubs. I'm excited.
Yeah, he was somebody we talked about in the preseason towards the later half of those games, talking about how this guy might have the most upside in this offense because, everyone's touting Allen Lazard as the clear wide receiver 1 because he's been there the longest. But there was some preseason hype around Doubs, and it's starting to show itself on the field, and that's exciting if you invested in him.
Yeah.
So let's talk briefly about the running backs because neither one of them did well, and I don't really. I mean, obviously the Buccaneers' defense against the run is in the top end of the league, but to this extent, 5.7 for Jones and 5.8 for Dillon, what do you think? I mean, you think that's a fluke, or you think it's a matchup, or what do you think?
I think just how the game went. I mean, they only scored 14 points in a win.
Right.
So I wouldn't panic too much. I think it's interesting to see what has happened so far this season of Jones booming in week 2, and then this happening, and Dillon almost seeming like he's more reliable. So Just keep an eye on both of
Right.
them, but I'm not surprised that they both did poorly in this game at the same time.
Yeah.
But as we've already said, I'm pretty sure we both are picking the Packers to beat the Patriots in this one. No, Mac Jones is just going to hurt them even more. Not that I think he's like a complete game changer, but he gets it done for this offense on a decent number of times. So
Yeah, I think what it really comes down to is, and of course I don't know Aaron Rodgers' record against Bill Belichick, but I just feel like Rodgers and this defense that they seem to have is going to be enough to stop a Patriots team that's missing their starting QB.
yeah. All right, we'll move on to Sunday Night Football. Chiefs at Buccaneers. Should be a good one.
Yeah, this one might be played in Minnesota.
Oh, yes, due to the hurricane, potential hurricane in Tampa Bay, as you were telling me about. So, yeah, that would be interesting to see what happens. I don't know exactly what the fantasy ramifications would be if they would do it at the same time and all that, but just keep an eye on that, I guess.
Right.
Only thing I'll say about the Chiefs, and we always say this, and the Chiefs, and a surprise loss of the Colts, as we already mentioned, so keep that in mind. It was kind of a weird one for them. But sell high on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Please, please, please.
Yeah, if you're hanging on to him through the first 3 weeks, you are a gambling man, because I'm telling you, the regression is coming. He's getting no touches.
40% of snaps. 12 touches.
12 touches.
Got a touchdown. He had
0 rushing
7
yards, I'm seeing.
carries on 0 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. What?
How does that even make sense?
It doesn't. I double-checked it. I did. That's ridiculous. Sell high.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yes.
That is hilariously
that
bad.
is one of the funniest stat lines I've ever seen to then have a productive fantasy day.
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, you gotta like the fact that he's getting receptions. That's the only positive I'll give on him, but he's just not getting enough touches for how he's probably currently valued in a lot of eyes of many people.
Yeah, if anyone's just looking at fantasy points, just blindly, they're got tunnel vision on the points.
It's a lot of people.
Man, sell to that
Yeah.
guy or gal because Edwards-Helaire is not the guy. I've been saying it for 3 straight weeks. I'm glad you're on the train now.
I always have been.
Talking about week 4. I know you were with me the whole time. I'm just saying, it feels like I've always been the one writing notes for the Chiefs,
Yes.
and so it's good to know that you feel the same way even here.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and talk about the Bucs now.
So with the Buccaneers, the only player I'll talk about, because they were without Mike Evans, who will return from his suspension, without Godwin, Russell Gage was just able to flourish.
Julio
Jones too. Yes, that's the other player I was missing. But Russell Gage was able to flourish. 24.7 fantasy points, 12 receptions on 13 targets, 1 receiving touchdown, 87 yards, and a fumble. But I would say that there's probably too many mouths to feed for Gage to be consistent once everyone in the wide receiver room is healthy.
Yeah, the only reason Gage had this type of game is because there was no one else to throw to. So, if you played Gage, good call. But moving forward, when the rest of the crew is back, I don't know how you can. So, okay, so I've seen you've picked the Bucs here.
Yeah, Brady in prime time, baby.
That's true. I went against Brady last week and it worked out for me, but I will not do it here. I'm thinking that with Mike Evans back, it's going to be a completely different game. The Chiefs' defense doesn't scare me, and I think Brady's going to be looking to kind of have a big game after last week's underperformance. And it's really not any fault of his own. It's just he had no one to throw to. Russell Gage was the main guy, and obviously he performed well, but he is not an alpha.
Yeah,
so,
and the Chiefs kind of had a
we're both
fluky win in Week 2 against the Chargers with a big pick 6 at the end of the game, and then they lost to the Colts.
Right.
This AFC West, man, wow. Not performing as people expected thus far. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right track.
All right, let's talk about the last game we'll talk about. Monday Night Football, Rams at 49ers, divisional matchup. So, each of these quarterbacks had 18 completions in Week 3, so kind of skews the discussion with the pass catchers because that's not a ton. No pass catcher saw more than 4 receptions on the Rams. Cooper Kupp still got it done with a 20-yard rush, I believe, even though he didn't really boom. But by his standards, he still...
It was a rushing touchdown.
Yeah, he still got it done, even though it was a weird day. So let's just talk about the
the running backs, the backfield. So literally a 50-50 split between Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson. So I guess Akers is going in the right direction. Akers had 10.1 fantasy points, 12 rushes for 61 yards, and a touchdown. He must have also had a fumble, it seems, to go down to 10.1. So no receptions.
Yeah.
Darrell Henderson, 1.7 fantasy points, 4 rushes for 17 yards, 0 receptions on 1 target. Not an exciting backfield. But Akers is going in the right direction.
No. Yeah, and that's promising. Trying to figure out, yet it doesn't track fumbles for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But either way, yeah, it's it's reassuring to see that Akers is getting more of the snaps and more of the carries. Maybe returning on investment later or sooner rather than we thought, based on how week 1 went, especially. But I will say that this was just kind of a weird game for the Rams. I mean, like you mentioned, 18 completions for Stafford is far under what we expect on any given week, especially with Cooper Kupp. But I want to quickly talk about Allen Robinson, who is just kind of falling off the face of the earth for a consecutive season. So what do you make of that? I know you rostered him, so I think you're the best person to ask.
I didn't want to talk about him. I think that it's been...
I noticed you excluded him.
I think it's been weird. I mean, week 1, they got dominated by the Bills. Week 2, he had a touchdown. So he had a good week.
Could have had two.
Week 3, though, Stafford didn't throw the ball a whole lot. So I'm not completely panicking, but not super excited either. But there are reasons for why it hasn't been great so far. So that's what's keeping me sane. Honestly.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean... No, and I think that we're both picking the Rams to win this one, before we talk about the 49ers, but I think that, just because the 49ers do not look very good on offense.
No.
Obviously, George Kittle coming back, and let's go ahead and jump into that. I think, so, just under 7 fantasy points.
Yeah.
He played 91% of the snaps. I'm not really concerned about anyone taking touches away from Kittle from a tight end perspective. My main concern is going to be that they just lost their left tackle, and they're probably going to ask Kittle to block more because he's really, really effective at blocking. Yeah. So I think my concern is going to be that Kittle's upside is going to be reduced based on that development, and just Jimmy Garoppolo's not very good at QB.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. So what else do you want to talk about?
Jeff Wilson, I'll talk about, who actually had a pretty good game. 11.6 fantasy points, 12 rushes for 75 yards, 3 receptions on 3 targets, 31 yards, and a fumble. Played 73% of snaps. I feel like you got to feel pretty good about him in the absence of Elijah Mitchell for at least, it seems, probably the next 5 weeks maybe.
He's flex worthy.
Yeah,
for sure.
So someone with ETN, Wilson's making that RB2 slot, it seems, right now. Which is crazy for my team. I'm glad I have Saquon. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're both picking the Rams to win this one in this divisional matchup, and that wraps it up for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and you got anything else to add before we end it?
No, we'll see you next week.
All right.
Good luck.
Peace out, everybody.